Hi, and welcome to the Curious Cardiologist Podcast. My name is Dr. Sanjay Bhojraj, board-certified interventional cardiologist and functional medicine practitioner. In this podcast, I'm going to look at old problems in new ways. We're going to have a series of guests who are going to force us to challenge the status quo and rethink the way we approach health. Because I found in conventional medicine, we really just treat things, but what we need to do is focus on healing. So if that sounds like something that you like, if you're a practitioner, if you are a patient, if you're someone who's just looking to optimize your health, you found the right place. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Cardiologist Podcast. I'm Dr. Bhojraj, interventional cardiologist and functional medicine practitioner. And on today's show, I always say I'm so excited, but today I'm really excited. We are meeting with Dr. Michael Leon, who is an amazing guy with gentleman with an amazing device, which we'll get into in a moment. Dr. Leon is a PhD, and he's a professor at the University of California, Irvine, UCI, right in my backyard, in the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior. He is now the Chief Science Officer, I think, at Lab 3, the company that produces his device called MemoryAir. So, Dr. Leon, so great to have you.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. And now you've been kind of through a pathway of discovery for a lot of things. And you know, this device is so intriguing. And so we'll get to it here in a moment. But basically, we are engaging the olfactory system. And for those of you who don't know, that's our fancy medical way of saying smell to improve brain health. So why don't you run us through how did we get here? I mean, this is a pretty remarkable thing. And I'll tell you, I remember from my medical school, first year medical school, neuroanatomy, that the olfactory nerve, I think it's cranial of 2 or 3, one of those, I can't remember, is very special because it has a direct connection between the outside world and the brain. So is this kind of what we're leveraging when we talk about this scent and the sense of olfaction and healing our brains?
Yeah, so the only sensory system that has direct superhighway access to both the memory centers and the emotional center of the brain is the olfactory system. All the other senses have to go through basically the side streets of the brain before they
relay
can have an
switches
impact.
and they have to go from the red and switch it the stop to go to the blue line and things like that. So the
Yes.
olfactory just goes straight and so how did the basic science research of this start? Did you start in humans, animals? Tell us, maybe let's start with, we'll just do a general 10,000-foot view of what MemoryAir is, and then let's maybe get back into the basic science just so our listeners are up to speed.
So it turns out that your brain needs a great deal of olfactory odor stimulation in order to maintain its health. The brain evolved at a time when there was plenty of odors. Nobody ever took showers, for example. And it turns out it continues to need it, even though people take showers now and we've cleaned up our environment so that there's almost no odors in the environment. And basically, we're walking around with deprived brains because we haven't been stimulating it the way it should have been over the course of millennia. So in addition to that, the olfactory sensory neurons, the ones that actually bind to the specific chemicals, those are the only neurons that exist outside of the body. And so they're subjected to everything in our environment. So smoke, toxins, pollution, wide variety of
temperature,
light,
all
stress,
the things. Yeah.
Right. So anything that can impact it also can damage the olfactory system. And over time, what happens is that by the time most people hit 60, their olfactory ability starts to deteriorate significantly and their memory ability starts to deteriorate. And it goes downhill hand in hand for the rest of your life.
Do we have a sense of why olfaction starts to trail down in our 60s? Is it is there like a chicken and egg kind of thing happening here? Like brain starts to deteriorate, so smell does, or smell deteriorates first and brain does? What does that look like for folks?
So there is a waste disposal system in the brain called the glymphatic system. I'm sure everybody will remember that one.
I've talked about several. It's like lymphatic with a G. Yeah.
Yes. And what it is, it's a waste disposal system. The brain produces all sorts of metabolic things and damaging things. But when you're sleeping, when you are in deep sleep, slow wave sleep, the end feed of the astrocytes, there are cells there that sort of seal up this area. And what they do is they retract and they allow the fluid to wash through the brain. And it goes from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. And it's pulsed through with arterial pressure. So your arteries are
Wow.
pumping, and it
So
actually
it's like
pushes.
pressure washing your brain.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
So as people get older, what happens is that they don't sleep as much. They don't have as much slow wave sleep, and so the waste disposal system is impacted. It doesn't work as well. In addition to that, the arteries start to get hardening, and so you get less push in the system. And then all of the waste goes to the front of the brain and goes through the holes that the olfactory sensory neurons use to get into the brain. So it's called the cribriform plate. It's a bunch of holes. It looks like a cheese grater.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the material, the waste material with all the toxins in it, is pushed out through that way and then taken from the external lymphatic system away and eventually disposed by the kidneys.
This is so amazing that the body works like this. So to recap, you have these astrocytes, which are kind of, I think of, they're the guys at the spigot, like opening and closing. So at nighttime, as we're sleeping, they open up. So in a sense, kind of creating more permeability in scientific terms for then this pressure head of arterial pressure. And I'm sure it's dampened somewhat. I mean, from my recollection, when I used to do lumbar punctures, the normal pressure of CSF is probably about 6 to 8 centimeters of water. I remember we had to hold a tube up. We would get the inline in and we hold the tube up. And there's a condition called pseudotumor cerebri, which is a medical student I diagnosed once, and I thought that I was looking because this person had high CSF pressure. So we're opening up the gates, then that kind of lets this kind of wave, I think of almost like a tsunami of cleaning fluid kind of push in. It starts in the back of our brain, then goes to the front. So if we're not getting enough sleep, we don't have enough time to clear the toxins completely from the system. But then also these then get pushed from the back to the front through the cribriform plate into our lymphatic. So a pretty remarkable symphony of things happening here, and just something as simple as sleep deprivation throws this off. Is that why when I wake up early, like my dog is barking or something, like I kind of feel these like cobwebs, or sometimes you wake up headachy? Is that what's going on, or is that completely kind of different?
It
I'm
could
just
be.
yeah.
People haven't studied it in that way.
Yeah.
But clearly, if you don't get good clearance of all of these toxins and metabolic things that have developed, the brain is going to be inflamed.
Mhm.
And what all of this does is it pushes all of this material. And so it basically marinates the olfactory system in this toxic material. And in fact, if you look at, as we have 160 medical disorders, all 160 of them, and this is everything from heart disease to cancer to schizophrenia, all of them have chronic inflammation and olfactory loss.
Wow.
And we think it's this chronic inflammation that damages the olfactory system. And of course, it builds up over time. And as you're clearing it less efficiently, it deteriorates. And that's why we think by the age of 60, you start to have this kind of deterioration. But
Wow.
any kind of loss of olfactory ability at any time will cause memory loss as well. For example, even a chronically stuffed nose will cause memory loss, right?
Hmm.
And people who've had COVID also had olfactory loss, and many people also had cognitive loss as well.
Wow.
And so whenever you see olfactory loss, you always see memory loss. All of the dementias are accompanied by olfactory loss, for example.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind clinically is Parkinson's. Anosmia is kind of classically meaning loss of smell, is one of the hallmark signs of this. And at that point, and correct me if I'm wrong, the horse is kind of already out of the barn, if you have such significant inflammation. And I think that's in the substantia nigra pars compacta, if I remember my neuroanatomy correctly. Look at me talking to a neurobiologist about this, but I'm just a lowly cardiologist. But when you have that much inflammation in that particular location, yeah, a sign is going to be olfaction. So smell then is maybe kind of a canary in the coal mine
Yeah.
for some of these diseases. And is that kind of what led to the basic science behind this, or how did you decide that this is something that's worthy of
So if you look carefully, the loss of the ability to smell things precedes the other symptoms of, for example, Parkinson's disease, in that case by years.
Mm.
But it's also the first symptom of Alzheimer's disease. And people have done very difficult studies where they look at your olfactory ability and then they track your medical status over the next, for example, decade.
Hmm.
So these are hard studies to run. But when they've run them, they found that olfactory loss precedes many medical problems, including heart disease, right?
Wow.
And I should also point out that when you have heart failure, the arteries that are pushing the lymphatic system slow down. And so heart disease actually triggers a loss of this waste cleaning process as well.
Wow. And I wonder, it makes me wonder of course, I'm a cardiologist, right? So we're going to spend a little time here in the cardiac world, but,
Right.
we get so aggressive about blood pressure control and really, when you talk and kind of in heart failure in particular, what we say is titrate blood pressure and heart rate down to near syncope, meaning, get the blood pressure as low as you can and the heart rate as low as you can just before somebody's going to pass out because cardiologists, we are the center of the universe and the earth and the suns revolve around us. People don't realize that. But, the idea there is by reducing load on the heart, what's called afterload, the force it has to push against, and heart rate, which is the two drivers, stroke volume times heart rate equals cardiac output. So if you're slowing the heart down and reducing the pressure it has to push against, you're preserving heart function, but at the expense of what? So it's very interesting to me that the glymphatic system starts to fail because oftentimes in these patients, and we are so far away from your device right now. I know we'll get to it in a moment, but it's just
We'll get there.
we'll get there for sure. But makes me wonder in the cardiology universe. We are just looking at MACE, major adverse coronary events, and I always wonder what are the other things that we're not looking at. It really kind of has me wondering because if we're dropping these people that low, we're affecting glymphatics. Are we causing kind of a loss of cognition? And oftentimes, we see this in heart failure patients where they just become foggy. And this is the first time in, 25 years of being a cardiologist where I've thought, wow, we are screwing something up here. And, what's the point of living with a good heart if your brain is not functioning, right? So pretty
Yeah.
remarkable. I mean, so outside of the cardiovascular system, you mentioned a lot of other disease states preceded by this. I mean, is it most of like let's just call it the inflammatory type things like autoimmune issues, arthritis, lupus, things like that? Is that where you're seeing these things or what sorts of
Those for
conditions?
sure. But things like epilepsy and stroke and schizophrenia and depression, olfactory loss precedes depression. Olfactory loss precedes multiple sclerosis
Hmm.
and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease and heart disease. And it may be that the loss of this system impacts many things, not only in the brain, but in the body as well, and
So
actually increases the risk of disease.
yeah, and how do you quantify this? Because, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and like the intensity of smell, I would think is a very difficult thing to quantify, right? Because it's not like it's units on a scale of 1 to 10. Oh, it's got a nice beat, easy to dance to. I give it a 10, right? So how do you, for those of you old enough to remember American Bandstand, but how do you do these studies? How do you quantify that intensity of smell? Or I guess another way to ask that is how clinically can somebody at home realize that, what, my sense of smell isn't it's not as high fidelity as it should be.
Well, there are tests that are standardized and used all over the world. Millions of people have taken it and all that. One of them is a scratch and sniff card, and you say what you think the smell is, if you can smell anything. Another one is a series of, they look like marking pencils. You take off, you sniff, you put it on again, and that tells you. So people are tested for their ability to sense any odor. Well, it's just sort of say, yes, I smell something. They also are able to test to see if you can identify the odor. So that's also important. And then there's a test of, are you able to discriminate similar or highly different odors? And all those things are put together to give you a score, and they tell you how good or how bad your olfactory ability is.
So I think like in a hearing test where they'll have like a tone and they play it at lower volume and lower and different frequencies. So there's different levers that you can pull. So you can have a high concentration of like, let's say an essential oil or whatever, high
Right,
concentration of smell, and then kind of slowly dilute that out
right.
and then see, oh, at the 1 to 10,000 dilution, they're still able to differentiate between peppermint and spearmint or whatever. Those are just for some reason two similar smells that came into
Yeah,
mind. And is there a difference between noxious odors, meaning like bad smells, quote unquote? Because
yeah.
as you're talking about anthropologically the importance of smell, the first thing that came into mind is skunk, right? And you can smell skunk from a mile away, and that's a danger sign, right? To say don't go here, right? And I think of my dog who's sleeping in the background. I don't know if you can see him in the
Yeah.
background there. But where's Ziggy? Oh, he's on the other side of his bed. You can't see him. But, you know, his sense of smell is so remarkable. We call it P-mail, where he smells the trees and can tell which of his buddies kind of came by. So, you know, so he's out there. Dogs are obviously very in tuned. I probably have a larger part of their brain devoted to olfaction. But is there a difference between like bad smells and good smells for brain health?
Yes. So the remarkable thing about pleasant smells, and that's what we use in our therapy, but pleasant cells decrease inflammation. And we
Huh.
think inflammation is critical for all of the bad things that happen, including the loss of smell. Bad odors or unpleasant or disgusting odors increase inflammation chronically. And so it's sort of a preparatory response that the body and the brain is making, because bad odors typically introduce bad things happening. And so the inflammation is probably there to respond to bad things happening. But it's a
Wow.
very
So
clear kind of thing.
So an inflammation is an immune response, right? I mean, that's kind of what it
Yeah.
is. So if you sniff like a bad piece of food, like a vegetable that's rotting, and you smell it and you say, "Oh, you know what? I'm still hungry. I'm going to eat it." That inflammation, that immune response, may be kind of the prep for, okay, we're going to get a bad thing here. We need to rev up and protect
Yeah.
ourselves. What a remark! I mean, the more I talk to folks in different areas, I mean, the more I'm just amazed at this human body. And I think if
Yeah.
people, as they listen, I mean, if you don't think that your body is remarkable, I don't know what more we could do, and be very cautious about the inputs and the outputs and all that stuff, because what an amazing machines. Wow. So anthropologically it makes sense. And then do you start in animals? Do you start in human? Like how do we go
So
from
both.
basic science?
So
Yeah.
I should mention one more thing about this is that you have a reflex. The olfactory system also has a superhighway access to the cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for coordinating
And
muscle
balance and
activity
yeah.
and
Yeah.
balance and all that. But it also, when you smell a pleasant odor, what happens is that it activates the cerebellum and increases sniffing. So you see or smell a rose, you go, right, you sniff it. But when you have a bad odor, a disgusting odor, the reflex is the opposite. It stops all respiration. So you take a breath and you smell something bad and you don't breathe it anymore. You turn away and you get away from that situation. So the brain actually has a reflexive response to pleasantness and unpleasantness in the odors that it senses.
And that happens in milliseconds, probably. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like I'm trying. Boy, I should have reread my neuroanatomy textbooks. But like premotor, like a premotor reflex, I can't. Or like it's a spinal cord reflex where you touch a hot plate or whatever, and before your brain even perceives the heat, your hand is already off of it. So smell is coordinated in that way as well. Wow. So is smell the king of the senses when it comes to brain health? I mean, like, do you see the same when you have deprivation of vision or hearing, or is it that unique and kind of special sacred connection that olfaction has into the brain that really makes smell so important?
Yeah, so because the olfactory system has this way access to the memory and the emotional centers, it has consequently a great deal more impact when you lose it and also when you amplify it. So all of these things can impact your memory and your emotions. It is the olfactory system is just much more powerful. And indeed, by the time you reach middle age, your all-cause mortality, which means whether you live or whether you die for any reason,
Any reason?
can be accurately predicted by your ability to smell things.
Why don't more people know about this?
So the
Like, this is crazy to me. Like, I mean, I live in a very specific world silo of cardiovascular health, but and now I do a fair bit of longevity medicine. So, I mean, I think we need to maybe beat that drum with folks, because it seems like you can probably buy a smell sniff kit on Amazon and kind of test your. I mean, I don't know if it's out there, but or see a smell professional. But what a remarkably elegantly simple test to be associated with all cause mortality. That absolutely fascinates me.
Yeah. And there are 10 major epidemiological studies showing that over and over and over again. So it's a very clear phenomenon. The other thing is that when you don't have sufficient olfactory stimulation and you look at the brain, the memory centers deteriorate and underlie a loss of memory. And similarly, the emotional center of the brain, the amygdala, becomes more reactive. And so you have an increased probability of having depression because you don't have sufficient olfactory stimulation and you don't have with the memory that you should have because you've lost your olfactory stimulation.
Wow. So you become like an angry, forgetful drunk.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So let's step in then to the MemoryAir device. And I know that we focus a lot on cognition, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, but how did that translate from research into a commercially currently available device? And we'll have it linked in the show notes. But a commercially available device, what sorts of studies have been done? What does the science show? And I know that we had spoken before about, significant improvements in memory and cognition and these sorts of things. So let's maybe take some time to run through the data of well, first of all, we're talking about data. What is the device? Like, like, is it a kit that you buy? Is it a washing machine size thing? What is the device? Where do you use it? Do you have to kind of go into a special box to use it, or run us through what the commercial device looks like?
Okay, so taking away olfactory stimulation is bad for the health of the brain. It turns out that enriching, having a lot of olfactory stimulation, is good for the brain. The problem is that nobody will do it. So if you ask people to look at, for example, 40 different odors, pleasant odors every day, you have to unscrew a cap, you have to smell it, you have to put it back, put it there. Nobody's going to do that, particularly people who are older or have memory problems. So we developed a device that sits on your nightstand. I think it's 5 inches by 5 inches by 9 inches
So
tall,
like a little alarm clock, basically.
more or less. And
Okay.
it blows 40 pleasant odors at you while you're sleeping. And it does that without any effort. After the first night, you don't even have to press a button. And so we get universal compliance for something that they wouldn't do. And this is able to improve their memory and their emotional status.
So
So we
it's like
did
a
one
flight.
study.
It's like a flight of sniffs, basically. That kind of just
Yes.
over time. And what is the length of time for these 40? Like, is it in over like a few hours? Is it a few like 2 hours? Like, what is the
Yeah,
duration of the
it
therapy?
basically, while you're sleeping, it's on most of the time. So it's hours. The different odors come on briefly, you sniff them, and you continue to sleep. While you're sleeping, the olfactory system does not have the connections to the sleep-wake parts of your brain. And so you can't wake somebody up with odors. It's just unlike all the other senses, which can wake people up. And so people just sleep through the night. We actually find they sleep 22 minutes more
Hmm.
when they have this on. The first study that we did, we gave people olfactory enrichment, as we call it, while they were sleeping, and their memory improved. These are older adults that are healthy. Their memory improved by 226%, which is the biggest improvement in memory in this
Wow.
group anyone's found.
I mean,
So,
that's more than like with medications. And I mean, so
oh yeah,
226% improvement in memory tasks with
right,
a passive device that just basically plays. You hit the play button and it plays through the night.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And then a group in South Korea did a study where they used 40 different odors during the day uh, for people who have dementia. And most of the dementia, of course, is Alzheimer's disease. And they found on 5 different memory tasks, they found up to a 300% improvement in memory. And they also found a 325% improvement in depression symptoms. And so that's also, you know, remarkable.
Is that amygdala that, you'd mentioned the emotion side? Is that kind of
Yeah.
improvement in amygdala function, whatever the
Yes.
proper adjective there is? Oh, interesting.
Amygdalar. Yes. It's
Amygdalar function. And what about, and so memory improves, mood improves. Did they do any
right.
sort of a global quality of life score? I mean, did people just feel
Yes.
better? I mean, I kind of
Yes.
picture like the always look on the bright side of life from the old Monty Python. People just become like super happy again because they can remember and they may not be as reactive as they were before.
Yes. So that's exactly what happens. And so other groups have done this, and there are about 20 reports now of people giving olfactory enrichment, also called olfactory training, and showing improvements in memory and the parts of the brain that are associated with controlling memory. So it's a very well established phenomenon at this point.
So do you see like return of volume? Are you doing functional MRI? Like how are we quantifying what's happening during olfactory therapy?
Right. So for our study, we used functional MRI and found an almost identical pattern of response between those that have received olfactory enrichment and those who hadn't. And so the brain response parallels the behavioral response, as you
Wow.
would expect.
And how long does this take? Like, is it Like after 8 months, 2 years, 3 weeks, 2 weeks? I mean, what is the duration of therapy?
So
Not necessarily
our
before you see
study,
normalization, but before you see improvement.
so our study was 6 months, and we didn't track them every day, so we don't know exactly when they started to
When
improve.
the blip would
Right.
have been. Yeah.
But the study with the demented older adults found those significant results within 15 days, which is just
Wow. So
remarkable.
people who had advanced dementia, these are the real
Wasn't
kind of
advanced. It
okay.
was mild to moderate
Okay, but
dementia,
still, I mean, that's
but
and I
still,
think
it's right.
one of the worst there's a gentleman in this space, Dale Bredesen, who's a brain health expert and functional medicine expert, and he says
Mhm.
one of the worst things that ever happened in the cognitive health world is calling mild impairment mild, right? Because
Yeah,
it's actually significantly worse. So okay, so we're talking to people with like on a Montreal's cognitive assessment or something, kind of that mild to moderate disease, but they had, you said, a 300 something percent improvement
three
in memory,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
really, I mean, that is hard to do, folks. I mean, for those of you who are aware. And so the device, is it like a little cassette that you filled? You have to put in 40 different essential oils. What happens?
So
Do you
we have a belt, and every month you get a belt shipped to you, has 40 different compartments. You take out the old belt, throw it away, put the new belt in, press the button, and you're set to go for another month.
wow. So I think like an ammo belt, like Rambo. So it's just
It
got
looks
kind
exactly like that if you
okay.
were a mouse, right?
If okay. For a small
It's a
so
small ammo belt.
So from a practical standpoint, then, even for people who have like arthritis or something, it's a pretty easy thing to kind of switch out once a month. And does it run 7 days a week? Does it 5 days a week, 3 days a week? Like how often are you doing that therapy?
Every night,
Every night. Okay, so every night, 7 days, every 28 days or whatever, you get a new belt shipped out. You just kind of put it in, and it just I mean, so it's a circle probably, and it just runs through the 40 kind of
right?
things. I haven't seen the device, but I'm absolutely in love with it. It's like love at first non-sight, I guess maybe when I heard about this device. So we focus a lot on the cognitive, the Alzheimer's, the Parkinson's patient, but you also mentioned depression and anxiety, and mental health issues are a huge concern happening in younger and
Right.
younger patients, and like half I live here in Orange
Yeah.
County, as do you probably, and I feel like 90% of people are on some sort of antidepressant or something. So have there been studies, or are there studies planned to look at mood disorders on top of
Yeah.
cognition issues? And you mentioned schizophrenia, so we can talk about kind of heavy psychopath as well, psychopathology.
So there are now 3 clinical trials for depression, and in each case, olfactory enrichment improved the symptoms of the depressed individuals.
Wow. I mean, this is
So,
so cool. I mean, and what I love about that is, we're using the body to heal itself, which is one of my mantras and
right.
as we look at the number of people on these medications, bad things happen, and actually efficacy, particularly for antidepressants, drops off pretty quickly. So people are just stuck on these medicines that alter their brain chemistry for life without hopes of getting better. But this is something where you're using a natural scent to a natural function of the body to kind of heal itself. How about
Yeah.
in like the psychopathology world, like schizophrenia you had mentioned and things? Are there studies there with your device, or other studies with just olfactory training that show some benefit there as well?
So no one has done it for schizophrenia.
Oh, okay. I thought
We've done a number of studies with children who have autism,
whoa.
and
Phew. Let's crack into that box real quick. So children with
so
autism.
so children with autism, we give them olfactory enrichment, and the treatment is focused on that. But we also add other sensory stimuli to maximize the probability of success. And what we find is that after 6 months, parents do it at home. We give them a kit, and every 2 weeks we give them different exercises to do it. But every day they get 5 experiences with different odors. After 6 months, 42% of the children who received this kind of enrichment had a major improvement in their symptoms compared to 7% who are on standard care in Orange County, which is pretty
Wow. And
intense.
were there particular manifestations of autism that improved over others, like mapping out to areas of the brain, like verbal function or like OCD
Yeah.
type symptoms, or what was there a particular kind of thing that you saw improve more than others, maybe?
So we found an 8-point improvement in IQ, which is
Pretty
very difficult
remarkable.
to do
Yeah.
compared to nothing happening on standard care. We have a 200 over 200% improvement in receptive language, and That's also a big deal. And again, the controls had 20% improvement. Social interactions, of course, and then sensory responses. These kids are very reactive to sensory
Yeah.
stimuli, noises and lights and things like that. And that also improved significantly. And after 6 months, 21% were no longer considered to have classic autism anymore compared to
No, shut the
0%.
front door. What are you talking about? Are you serious?
Yeah. Yeah. Very powerful.
I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about how powerful that is. And so this is like a multi-sensory experience for these children with autism, though. So it's not
Right.
just olfaction. And is it the same MemoryAir device or a different device that we use
So
for these guys?
we're now planning to go back and use the MemoryAir device because
Okay.
if you have a child with autism and maybe other children, it's hard to spend 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening doing these exercises with the kids. And
Yeah.
so we'd like to have the parents just set it and forget it, once a month, put in a new belt. And we want to see if we can improve the symptoms of autism. And these are seriously affected kids. So it's not just mildly affected individuals. So
Wow.
we want to see whether MemoryAir can do that, and I think that will be a great breakthrough if that actually comes to fruition.
And this is what I love about this, being curious is who would have thought, right? Half the time I'm asking, boy, who would have thought XYZ, right? Who would have thought that a series of pleasant odors, right, could lead to such improvement in brain health? I've probably got a lot of listeners that live in the biohacker space and a lot of people who, may be in that pre-mild cognitive impairment space. So you've studied a lot of folks with, mild, moderate kind of established diagnoses. But for someone like me, so I'm 49, and so I think of myself as a relatively healthy guy and pretty smart, although my wife may differ with me on that last point. But this is it something where I can preemptively get a memory error and not have to deal with the deterioration of memory and stuff that comes with quote unquote age? Or does it really just help people who are affected get better? Or has that not been studied yet? Maybe is probably the one of the
So,
possibilities.
when we looked at older adults, they were healthy older adults. And so, they didn't have the profound memory loss that you see in dementia. And so what we're doing, I think, is preventing memory loss. And I think that people who are younger, who are middle-aged, will also benefit from it, maybe prevent it. The way I think about it is that, so there's a really interesting phenomenon called cognitive reserve. So if you look at the brains of people, older people, what you find is that about a third of them have all of the neuropathology that you see in Alzheimer's disease, but they don't have memory loss.
Say that one more time.
Okay, it's a hard.
You're showing the manifestations of the abnormal biology without having clinical manifestations of disease. Is that what you said? I mean,
That's
essentially?
exactly it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So well, say it one more time. I want to make sure that
Okay.
listeners kind of, yeah.
So the characteristic neuropathology of Alzheimer's disease is high levels of beta amyloid plaques and high levels of tau, the tangles. So you have these plaques and tangles. And if you look at the brains of people when they die, about a third of them have a high level of plaques and tangles, but they don't have memory loss.
Wow.
And the reason is that they have cognitive reserve, something called cognitive reserve. And that is, there are some people who have had a high level of education, a high level of intellectually challenging career experiences, and a high level of social activity. And all of this, we'll call it environmental enrichment, protects the brain from actually having the symptoms that are associated with both plaques and tangles. So it tells you two things. One is that the plaques and the tangles couldn't be the sole things responsible for memory
Right.
loss. And then you look to see what these people have, and they just have had a lot of environmental enrichment. And if you look at the animal models of human neurological disorders, and there are 24 of them, if you take these animal models of human neurological disorders and you keep them in this standard box cage, so they have restricted environmental stimulation, they have all of these symptoms that look just like the humans, right? So the Alzheimer's disease have poor memory, the autism mice have poor social interactions, and so forth. And this is true for heart disease and cancer and literally 24 other things. If you put them in an enriched environment, a bigger cage, more friends, a lot of things to do, they get a lot of environmental stimulation, just like people who have a high level of education and all that sort of thing. You don't see these symptoms. you see a great dampening of the symptoms, and in some cases, you see them completely eliminated.
Well, and I think of
Uh,
this as one of the one of the most important superpowers that we should never lose in my mind is neuroplasticity, right? Which is our ability for our brain to kind of basically come up with workarounds, right? And kind of retraining. And part of that is doing things like puzzles and Sudoku and jigsaw puzzles and those sorts of things, community, all these sorts of things. So this is almost like a biologic basis of why it's important to do that. And I think of like my grandmother, for instance, who, she had a lot of, well, let's even go with this. I had a physician who, when I came on early in my career, had just retired. He was running a busy practice, retired. And then within 6 months, he couldn't even remember his name because he stopped practicing. He was juggling, as a pediatrician in the area, hundreds of kids. And, he was a go, go, go. And then, his family said, you need to stop working, spend more time at home. And he did. And I ran into him at a restaurant and he couldn't even remember me 6 months later. So that social interaction is such a big deal. And Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General under President Biden, called out loneliness as a public health epidemic.
yeah.
And it might not just be loneliness, but rather isolation. So we see now biological models for why that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wow. So as we talk about then olfaction, and we mentioned amygdala as an area of importance, if we're looking at other things like stroke or traumatic brain injury that may not live in those kind of areas that the olfactory sense is directly linked to, but for like kids with sports injuries and and like chronic CTE, and all of these other neurologic pathologies, is there or could there be maybe a role for olfactory therapy in these things and for just brain health in general?
Yeah. So traumatic brain injury is not uncommon, and it is almost invariably accompanied by olfactory loss. So you have olfactory dysfunction when you have brain injury. If you give them olfactory enrichment or olfactory training, you actually see the parts of the brain that are damaged get bigger and improve.
No.
And so you can actually treat TBIs with olfactory enrichment.
Wow. What about, is there any data in stroke? Like patients that have had cerebrovascular accidents or?
I don't know of any in stroke,
Okay,
but
alright, but, I mean, stands to reason that,
right.
I mean, I always say this and the scientists always hate it, but the patients love it when I say lack of evidence isn't the same of lack of efficacy, right? So, there may be a role in stroke, we just don't know
Yeah.
yet, right? So
Yeah, as I say, there are about 160 disorders that we've identified that have olfactory loss as well as chronic inflammation. And that goes for all of the disorders that you mentioned and many, many more.
man, I would love, at some point to collaborate on maybe like even something as simple as a hypertension trial. Because like for me, a lot of what I do is work with diet and lifestyle and optimizing health. And we'll see just getting people to eat right, dropping low weight. We'll see a 20, 30 point drop in blood pressure within a few weeks. And, adding like a memory air. I mean, we might have to change the name to everything air because it sounds like there's so many different avenues for this device to just improve health. What are some of maybe the frontiers that you, I mean, my mind is just spinning in the back of all the different kind of inflammatory things that I like: cancer and diabetes, insulin resistance, hypertension, as I mentioned, atherosclerosis, hyperlipidemia. I could just sit here and blast off 50 or 60 different,
All
but
of
what
all of
what are
those
some?
things are I'm sorry. All of those things are accompanied by olfactory dysfunction. So
I, I mean,
in fact, there is an ability to try to treat all of these things with olfactory enrichment.
wow. I mean, let's get you infinite funding so we can do all these studies, right? Like, oh yeah, let's just get that. But absolutely fascinating. What are some of the areas that you're really, as we talk about, maybe outside of the brain, some of the areas that you're really fascinated and if I make the rank order list of the next one that I think is most important, what would be maybe the next two or three areas where you'd like to study olfactory therapy and its potential improvement for health outcomes?
Well, Parkinson's disease is a very obvious one because of the long-standing olfactory loss preceding all the other things. But I think there's also a really interesting group to work with, and that is children and children who have had adverse childhood experiences.
Mm.
And there's this wonderful set of studies, or now thousands of studies showing this, And what it is that if children experience any of 10, it's now been expanded, adverse experiences, parents divorcing, parent who has a
I
drug
mean,
problem.
it's the big T traumas and the little T traumas,
Yeah,
and ACE, the ACE score, I think is what it's called, right? The adverse childhood
yes,
event score. Yeah.
exactly. So these kids have all the brain damage that affects cognition and emotion and all sorts of other things. And, it's not considered to be a disease, so nobody's treating it with a drug or anything else. And therapy, talk therapy is just not going to be effective or possible. And so what we'd like to do is to see whether we can treat these kids either in their home with olfactory enrichment or in the classroom where we can have a single device for an entire classroom. And we've done a proof of concept study in these classrooms. And we find a significant improvement in executive function for these kids. Executive function is flexible intelligence, the ability to inhibit inappropriate behaviors, and the ability to focus on intellectual material. And so that's why it correlates very well with IQ and good grades in school, because those are the things that you need to do well in school. And so we think this may be something that certainly a large proportion of children will need, and probably eventually we think everyone might need this or should have this.
I mean, as you're saying it, I'm like, let's just put that in the HVAC in schools, right? I mean, and let's just get this, you know, let's get this in, smart buildings. And there's this whole universe now of wellness architecture and designing natural light and spaces to be in harmony with nature and our needs. And even something as simple as the type of lighting and the directionality of lighting become a big deal. Smell is one of those things that you never really think of other than Thanksgiving morning, you smell the all the goodness coming in the oven, right? But I mean, I
Yeah,
think there's so many.
there's actually a fair number of studies of people using this in retail establishments.
Oh yeah.
So if you have, or hotels and things like that. And so they want to affect your ability to sense things and to improve the likelihood that you'll spend some money.
Yeah, well, and so that's like using the information for maybe a less altruistic purpose, right? And so, but I mean, but to the point, they wouldn't do it if it didn't work, right? Like even like the music that you hear in the stores is to put you in a mood, and there's a whole cognitive psychology behind that music selection. So, if stores have been used, I mean, I think of like my gym, for instance, like I go to a gym called Lifetime Fitness, and whichever Lifetime location you go to here, Chicago, Miami, New York, DC, whatever, they all smell the same, right? And there's a certain degree of comfort in that because, okay,
Mhm.
I go to my gym all the time, even though this one is 90, 100 miles away from the one that I go to, I just feel the same. Or like a restaurant, right? You go to a fast food store, and I think of Jimmy John's when we talk about smell. They have a sign that says "free smells," right? And the Jimmy John's that I went to at college in Chicago was the same smell that I have here in Orange County. And there's a certain amount of, and it's leveraging memory and leveraging these things, right? And there's a certain amount of nostalgia that comes with the smell, or you smell a perfume and you think of the girlfriend that you had or the boyfriend that you had, years ago that
Mhm.
had that same smell. So it's a powerful sense for sure. And I think that mainline connection into the brain has a lot to do with that. But so
Mhm.
amazing that we can use this therapeutically.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would love to collaborate on a hypertension trial or MACE trials, the atherosclerosis trials. They always take forever because it takes a while for people to have a heart attack, which is a good thing. But man,
Mhm.
imagine if you could see, even a modest, what we would consider a modest drop, 5 to 6 points is as much as you see from a blood pressure medication in their clinical trials. So
Yeah.
just having this device bedside helps out. How do people get one? Is this commercially available? Is the website up and running? Like, where do they find you?
It's MemoryAir.com, and it's available. Anyone can purchase one over the internet, and it'll be sent to you. And then you also get a subscription where every month you get one of these belts sent to you automatically.
Awesome. Definitely don't pierce the well. I get like you'll probably get an intense smell all over the place. Well, Dr. Leon, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Just in recap, as we talk about the importance of olfaction across all inflammatory disorders, and that olfaction, the sense of smell, seeds hundreds of conditions in terms of our diagnostic ability, specifically focusing on cognitive impairment, also some Parkinson's, fascinating data in kids and autism, and probably so many more things to come. Super cool. I'm so glad that we're finally able. I met your team months ago. It must have been in springtime, and it took a while to get here. But I'm so glad that we did, because I think this is something that just vibes so much with me, of just a simple, elegant solution to so many problems. Oh, one question I did want to ask though is, do you see like in bed partners? So let's say I get this device. Do you see or have you tracked any outcomes in bed partners of people who have the device?
So the reach of the olfactory stimulation should be sufficient to cover both of them, but we haven't tracked the memory improvement of the partner that's sleeping on the other side of the bed.
Haven't done
So some
outcomes.
people may want to get two systems. Some people will be fine with a single one.
I think the businessman in me says they need to buy two systems, but I'll let you run your business. And what about for people on CPAP or BiPAP? What happens?
So
So they're on, like, they have sleep apnea. They wear that mask for support. Probably not for
yeah,
oral, but for like nasal CPAP, or I would sense some benefit
yeah.
there.
So we've tested it with people who have CPAP devices, and all that we do is we put the MemoryAir device output right in front of the CPAP input. So the odors come in, they go through the device, and they are smelled on the other end through the uh,
Okay, so it's like when a car pulls up to the intake, the air intake, and you're getting all the exhaust through the building. That happened once in the hospital.
yeah,
Some truck pulled up to our air intake, and everybody smelled like car
yeah.
exhaust. It was not pleasant, but it definitely can get through. So leverage that. Well, thank you so much for being here. Absolutely fascinating. I would love to kind of bring you back in some time, and as these clinical trials unfold, kind of learn more. And I mean, as my mind goes, I mean, I'm thinking about cancer and heart disease and inflammatory bowel, and just an amazing area of science, a kind of click hole of research that I've never fallen into, but now I kind of look forward to kind of dropping into olfactory therapy. On the podcast,
Great.
every time we end, I ask my guests three questions so we get to better know you. Nothing
Okay.
incriminating or anything like that, but just kind of rapid fire. Number one, what's your favorite place on earth? This is a place that I've been that I could live forever, or a place that I live that I'm so happy at now. What would that place look like for you on earth?
There is a little promontory in Dana Point that you may or may not have been to, but that's just a spectacular oceanside view, and it's right down the hill from my house.
Oh my gosh. So you're basically living right there anyway.
Yeah.
I surf at Joho and have coffee in the harbor on a regular basis, so I
Uh,
probably know exactly where you're talking about. Number two, what's your favorite food, your favorite thing to eat?
so there's this kind of shrimp that is found only a mile deep in the ocean off of Santa Barbara, and it's only available at a certain time of year, and they have to trap them and they have to keep them in uh, aerated salt water until the moment that they're cooked, but they are incredibly good tasting.
That is
So
the most specific answer I think we had. What do they do? Where do you have to go up to Santa Barbara to get them, or are they available down here?
you can get them at the Water Grill in Costa Mesa.
Okay, so fancy for sure, but have to get. And number three, what keeps you curious, either on the biology side or not? What's something that you love to watch documentaries about, or books that you love to read about this subject, whatever it may be?
Um, so I am highly motivated to keep myself from becoming bored. So I just consume an enormous amount of information. So, I mean, I'm writing an article now. It has over 500 references.
Oof.
So you have to read an enormous amount of information. You have to try to retain it and integrate it. But I love that. I love being ignorant of an area and finding out about it. And that's what keeps me going.
Well, it's just maintaining curiosity, right? I think that's key. And the second you give up curiosity, as one of my former guests said, you might as well just retire or die, because we are curious by nature. And I don't think that people who've never written a review article or a research paper understand how intense that is. You put this, year or two into this article, and it pops into the journal, and then it's like gone in a week, replaced by the next week's edition, and it is just a phenomenal amount of work. But wow, thank you for what you're doing. I am so excited, like I said, to see all the different areas, and I think particularly the work in autism with children, and potentially boosting learning right through olfaction. I think is so key. It's almost like a really cool biohack that you can do. So memoryair.com, like I said, we'll have links to everything. Thank you so much for being here with us
My
today.
pleasure.
And thank
Thanks
you
for inviting me.
and thanks to the listeners too for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Curious Cardiologist podcast, where we bring just fascinating people. This is such a cool job that I have to be able to meet with such cool people doing such amazing things. And it's like, to go back to your ocean, one of the quotes that I love is the farther you go in the ocean, the deeper it gets. And the more curious you become just by nature, the more questions you have to ask. So I just think it's absolutely fascinating. If you like what you hear today, please like and subscribe to the podcast. We're available on any platform. In fact, if you're listening to us, we're probably on a platform that has us. And if you have any comments, you really connected with something that we had to talk about today, or you said, Sanjay, you know what, you're off your rocker, you don't know what you're talking about, leave a comment. A part of being curious is learning from different viewpoints. And if you have more knowledge than I've got in an area, I would love to learn more. So leave a comment. I'll reply. I promise me and my team will take a look. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Curious Cardiologist Podcast. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.